Welcome to the World United. Welcome to the World United.
Stop that share. And then we will move on now to our final presenter for this segment. Eamonn Pollard is a principal and a PhD candidate. And Eamonn Pollard is married with 4 teenage children. He has degrees specializing in commerce, history, education, and theology, and is a candidate for a PhD at the University of Tasmania. He's principal of St. Aloysius Catholic College, and his session title is Anxiety and Depression Are on the Rise. How have we got to this point, and is there a way out? The case for service and solidarity to help achieve meaning and purpose. And welcome, Eamonn.
Thank you very much, Deb. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we
Lovely.
can.
And thanks also to Charlene, Virginia, and Daniel for all your inspirational words. I reckon I could, rather than talk for 10 or 15 minutes, I could probably talk for 1 now, because I think most of what I've had to say is redundant. You've already covered it, so I'm very inspired. Over the last 25 years or so, a very large wellbeing industry has developed, yet we're possibly more unhappy than ever. Survey after survey indicate an increasing slide into anxiety and depression, especially amongst our youth. Today, I'm going to look at how wellbeing has been understood over the centuries up to where we are now, and I'm going to suggest that a return to older notions of wellbeing, with particular reference to Aristotle and Kierkegaard, may help guide us to a greater sense of meaning and purpose, because I think that's what gives us wellbeing in the longer run. In many ways, we could say that our teenagers have it pretty good. I get complaint all day from my own and from the kids where I work, and I think, gee, you've actually got it pretty good, but there's also an epidemic of anxiety and depression. What's worse is it's the leading cause of death amongst 15 to 24-year-olds in Australia. I've been working with teenagers in schools for more than 20 years, the last several as principal in a couple of places, and the hardest thing I've ever done, I think, is to tell students and staff of the suicide of a young girl in Year 9 a few years ago. According to the 2020 Annual State of Mind Survey, researched by the State of Mind and the University of Newcastle, young Australians' mental health is the most strained in the nation. I can tell you it's worse now than it was 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. But across all ages, all of us, the amount of people reporting depression, anxiety or stress was up by 78%. That's in the last 12 months. Now, of course, this was exacerbated by COVID and the associated lockdowns. We know that the amount of books, articles, seminars and gurus on the topic of wellbeing has boomed in the last 20 years or so. But what, in fact, is wellbeing? And how have we got to this point of rampant anxiety and depression? As Deb mentioned, I've been doing a PhD for the last few years on the topic of wellbeing of teenagers. And part of my research has been to try and understand how notions of wellbeing have evolved and been understood over the many centuries. The ancient Greeks had very well developed theories of well-being. Philosophy for the ancient Greeks was not an academic discipline concerned with unreadable minutiae, as it is too often today. They were deeply interested in how to live. The question they asked themselves is the same one we might ask ourselves: what is the good life? The most important scholar in this regard was Aristotle, and his belief was that the goal of life was to achieve eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is variously translated as well-being or happiness, but flourishing or prosperity might be better definitions. Aristotle's recipe for how to live a eudaimonic life was to live ethically, to reach your potential, to have a concern for the well-being of others, and to contemplate intellectually. It was ancient Greek philosophy, Judaism, and Christianity that formed the cosmological and ethical framework of the Western world that we understand today. Identity was found as part of your community and social class. The notion of individualism and a personal search for meaning for most did not exist. Meaning and metaphysical order was provided by the church, which permeated all aspects of life. But the dominance of the church was challenged by big movements like the Reformation, scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, secularism, atheism, and so forth. So the search for meaning became more secular, focused on this world, and individualized. The responsibility for finding meaning slowly transferred from being a given in your community to one where you have to work it out for yourself. Going back to the 16th century, Copernicus initiated a new way of thinking and understanding of cosmology that moved planet Earth and the human beings on it from being at the center of the universe to one more insignificant rock out in the middle of the indifferent universe. The human subject's conception of his place and significance shifted from being at the center to one of demotion to comparative insignificance. This filled into philosophy. We thought we knew a whole lot, but people like Descartes and Kant showed that human knowledge was a lot less certain than we previously understood. We know some of the big names over history, such as Karl Marx, challenged capitalism as an equitable system of economics, contending that there were more losers than winners. Charles Darwin showed that humans are part of evolution. Nietzsche advocated for an end of God, religion, idealism, and metaphysics. He also advocated for perspectivism. That is, that there's different points of view, which leads to relativism, which can in turn lead to nihilism and pessimism, because there's no hierarchy of values and meaning. And Heidegger, I heard this saying 20 years ago and never understood it. I've only started to understand it of late, and that is that we are born or thrown into a world which we struggle to understand or make sense of. The poet Matthew Arnold, in his 1851 poem Dover Beach, captures it very well, what Schnabel describes as the metaphysical phase shift from religion to evolution, from spiritual hope to brute existence, which are bereft of metaphysical or religious optimism. So I'll read some of that to you. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy nor love nor light nor certitude nor peace nor help for pain, and we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Too many in our culture today, as we know, are experiencing what Nietzsche described as the great danger to humankind, a retrospective weariness, the will turning against life, the tender and sorrowful signs of the ultimate illness, nihilism. And there's certainly been times when I've felt that way. Most people would not be aware of all the narratives I've just read to you, yet have been impacted. We might even ask the question, has the death of God and objective truth meant that we're all existentialists trying to make our way in a world bereft of metaphysical certainty and struggling to find values to live by? Kierkegaard agreed with Aristotle in saying that a life devoted to pleasure seeking is doomed to failure. Both Aristotle and Kierkegaard believed that living ethically was a superior way to live. Kierkegaard was of the view that life is not going to be easy, but there is a certain satisfaction in living with a courageous commitment to people, ideals, and projects. As mentioned earlier, the word well-being has become very commonplace over the last 10, 15 years. I've found that most of the notions of well-being are about feeling good now. In a word, hedonism. And we need hedonism. It's a constituent element of well-being. We all need a glass of wine, Netflix, and so forth. I'm looking forward to mine in about 2 hours. However, if the goal of life is pleasure, we might be destined to be unhappy. We get stuck on the hedonic treadmill. Is constantly seeking pleasure in the end an arrested state of development? Is it a state of not having grown up? As the economist Galbraith pointed out back in the 60s, our economic system with its advertising is constantly seeking to convince us that we need more products to be happy. Daniel's example of the hedge trimmer was perfect. A lot of us have more than we need and it's weighing us down. Do we own the products or do they own us? We have bigger houses, smaller families, yet storage facilities are more in demand, so that we have to store more of our stuff that won't fit into our homes. Starting in the 1960s and really gaining pace politically and economically in the 80s, we live in an age of individualism, neoliberalism, with one feeding the other. The market requires competition and commodification, which works against our deepest needs of connection and relationships. And a life devoted to pleasure seeking is likely to be harmful to the environment as we keep buying more and more products. The rates of aid to nations suffering from poverty is poor from Australia as we prioritise our own living standards. Constant pleasure seeking and avoidance of doing the necessary aspects of being adult or human also reduce our resilience as we haven't developed coping mechanisms. Resilience is one of the main antidotes to anxiety. Seligman concisely and coherently sums up the problem and solution to modern notions of well-being. He argues that we have come to exalt the self, considering our own personal fulfillment a sacred right, yet the self is a very poor site of meaning, for meaning. He states that the meaningful life consists in belonging to and serving something that you believe is bigger than yourself or the self. Seligman goes on to say, unlike our ancestors who were primarily concerned with duty, we privilege feelings, more precisely our own feelings, and are excessively concerned with personal gratifications and losses. There is an inward look for meaning rather than a commitment to the common good, what Seligman calls an overcommitment to the self and an undercommitment to the common good. We know that the internet and social media are relatively recent phenomena. Podcasting philosopher Dave Taylor notes that two deep human needs are close, intimate relationships and solitude. Taylor goes on to state that social media achieve neither. A person on social media is neither alone nor in face-to-face company with another human being. More face-to-face socialising produces oxytocin, which increases productivity, reduces self-interest, increases psychological safety, altruism, and teamwork. Social media for many is an attempt to fill a loneliness gap. Face-to-face connection is far more effective. What to do about this? I now want to suggest a different approach and set of values, an alternative narrative, a different way to live than one focused on hedonism, materialism, competition, and commodification. This narrative emphasises meaning, purpose, service, encounter, love, and liberation, which all lead to greater well-being. Meaning and purpose, and we've already heard this this afternoon from Virginia and others, are antidotes to anxiety and depression. Viktor Frankl wrote one of the most iconic books of the 20th century, Man's Search for Meaning. And you might be aware, you're probably aware that Frankl and most of his family were sent to the Nazi death camps. Most of his family perished in the camps. Frankl's main work as a psychologist after the war was the development of what was called logotherapy. And logotherapy's main contention is that lack of meaning is the chief source of stress as well as anxiety, and logotherapy aids the patients to reach the meaning of life. Frankl, in the extremes of the death camps, saw that some were able to find meaning in these inhumane conditions. They were the ones who were more resilient to the immense suffering they endured. Thomas Nielsen, an academic from Canberra, agrees with Frankl and many others in believing that meaning increases well-being. Nielsen argues that deeper and longer lasting happiness and meaning come from serving others. Nielsen states that there is one common denominator of meaning regardless of culture, race, and religion, and that is being something to someone or something other than themselves. This is both liberating and revealing in what one learns about oneself. The ancient Greek word for truth was aletheia, which means that truth is revealed or disclosed. The giving of oneself paradoxically helps in the process of self-discovery and growing into one's best self. And if you can hear that bell, you now know I work in a school. One of the outcomes of this way of life, according to a number of theorists such as Buber and Levinas, is transcendence of space, time, and oneself, which is liberating. The transcendence of self often takes place through encounter with the other and their story. Attention moves from oneself to others. The Australian Aboriginal Lila Watson is attributed with saying, "If you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." According to the great Jewish thinkers Buber and Levinas I mentioned a few moments ago, the transcendence achieved by encounter and service is also an encounter with the sacred. So why and how does an attitude of action of altruism, giving, relationships, and service add to an individual's well-being? It's through encounter and listening that small and large transformations are possible. The inner life is not fully developed to its potential until it is expressed. It's the expressing of one's inner world through language that one comes to greater self-understanding. This is drawn out through conversation with a good listener. While technology may have taken over many of the functions of being human, technology cannot replace the experience of encounter. A good listener or reflection processes can help an individual discover something about themselves or draw out an aspect of self that may have otherwise not come to life. An experience of service, immersion can jolt or provoke a new worldview, one that is more life-giving. To summarise and conclude, I've given an account of the slide of the modern world into individualism and a lack of meaning and purpose. I've also provided an alternative narrative emphasising the importance of meaning, purpose, encounter, love, transcendence, and mutual liberation. What I'm advocating is not new nor innovative, nor is it a short-term fix that increases pleasure. It's more a different way of seeing the world and oneself in it, a different, more meaningful and purposeful way of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insights here. We appreciate it